I spent my early years living in a family yard with my cousins, my aunts, my grandaunts on Eve Street, where we had 3 wooden houses, of which ours was the smallest at that time. We had no outside toilet, and really we had to use an enamel bucket that was kept inside the house, and that bucket would be emptied ever so often, at nights usually, or in the very early mornings. And I remember once that bucket rusted, and it ended up with a small hole at the bottom. And I had to use carbonagus and cloth to make sure that the bucket would be able to retain whatever went into it during the day. And I had a really, worrisome experience once when downstairs of the house where we lived, there was a small area that my mom had rented to a lady, and the bucket ended up leaking. And the lady got really upset downstairs, and I had to get carbonagus and a small bucket and go downstairs and do the cleaning up for my mother. Next door was Ebenezer Church and school. It was a large wooden building. And in between our yard and Ebenezer Church, there was a space in the fence where we, as children, used to crawl through. And we used to go into Ebenezer yard and to play there. Because it was a church and school, there were lots of things always happening there. Funerals, weddings, christenings. One day I went across to Ebenezer to watch a funeral, and I remember it vividly, based on how it happened. I stood across from the church on Barrack Road, just next to the clock, the Garnier clock that's on that street. There was a lady called Miss Alicia who had a little shop where she sold Creole bun, Creole bread, and condiments made from things like coconuts. And while I was there was a funeral going on at Ebenezer Church. And during that time, the funeral was coming down the stairs. Ebenezer has very wide stairs, and they were coming down with this coffin. And Miss Alicia stood next to me. She had closed her doors, as the shops do in Belize back then when funerals were passing. And as I stood beside her, she looked at me and she said, "Child," she said, "do you know who that is in that coffin?" She said, "It's your father." And there was an interesting thing I found out later, that I was christened on a Wednesday. Back then, if a woman had a child and she wasn't married, babies like that were not allowed to be christened on a Sunday. When the congregation was there, they had to be christened on a special day separate from the congregation. Those are things and events like that in my early life that made it important for me to work hard to get an education and to be able to help my mom, because I realized she really needed to support myself and my brother. But in the process of getting that education, I also made sure that I took care of my mom. And even when I had to go away to study, it was important for me to have my children with me. By then I had 2 kids. They were 5 and 7 at the time. And I didn't want to leave them because it was so important for me to have family around me and have my children around me. And so I went to study, and I was told when I was leaving, and I had asked if I could take my kids. They told me, "No, Dr. Lewis, no, Mrs. Lewis, you have to first come and settle in before you bring your children with you." And so I went, and after about 3 months, they allowed me to have my kids with me, and so I took my kids. I made the decision that once they were independent, I would come home. That was a difficult decision to make, because I needed to have them with me, and I couldn't have both things at the same time. So I came back to Belize as promised, and I left my 2 children in Canada. I know that the importance of family for me stems back to my dad. I never had a dad. The way I lost my dad has affected my life in ways that sometimes I don't quite understand. And so today, my children, they don't live at home with me. I came back and I left one in Canada. I left the other one in the United States. But every year we make sure that we meet at least at Christmas time so that I can have them near and have them close because of that very important element in my life that has been with me since I've been 7 years old, to have a family, a close family of my own.
I look into the window of my mind, reflections of the fears I know